my business process? How do I integrate across my applications? These are promises and problems we've been talking about for a long time. And I assert, and we'll discuss, that one of the things that's different today is that by bringing together UI automation and API integration as part of one integrated business process automation platform, we can make a transformative difference to how we're able to attack these problems. And so we're going to talk today, especially about the deeper investments UiPath has been making in the integration platform, starting with the acquisition of Cloud Elements this past year. So one of the other things we've been talking about for a long time is this problem of fragmentation across the application estate. And this is something in the SaaS area that seems to be getting worse and worse. Now, a great thing about the SaaS era is we have many more solutions to pick from, tailored more toward the needs of individual users in other parts of the business. We have many more solutions tailored to just the problems we need solved. Now, with that, though, has become a lot more applications are getting used by customers, and that's only growing. So what's the problem with that? Well, as we all know from our daily work and observing others in the front office and the back office, the real work that people do, the business process, often spans a number of these applications, and then we're forced to work across them. We're forced to take data from here and manipulate it, get it over there, send an email, route it for approval, deal with all of this stuff in a very manual way. And often for a lot of people, that's very repetitive. They're just doing the same things over and over and over again. And it's not work we like to do, and it's even work that can be somewhat error prone. And this is really where automation platforms, the UiPath platform, starting with RPA, comes in and made a real difference. And that real difference comes because it was the first platform really to be centered on UI automation. Now, there's a few things that are very profound about UI automation. The first is it gives the platform a property that can emulate the work that people do, the full work of the business process. And while API-only approaches can get you some of the way, in some situations, they just can't capture all of the work that's done. And as the platform actually emulates the work of people, it's very natural and intuitive to develop for, which means faster time to solution, which means it can also unleash new development capacity on old and new problems. And the third thing is, because it's based on UI automation, we can reach anything that the eye can see. Because integration problems are 100% problems, not 80% problems. You need to be able to connect with and integrate with all of the applications that are involved in the scenario or the business process you're trying to solve. So with that, you can unleash people from this manual repetitive work. And with that as well, you can get to a point where these are automated. They're reliable, repeatable, auditable actions now taken. So let's talk further about the role of UI automation and API integration and how they work together to produce a better end result. Now, we know that there are some cases where only UI automation will do. There's not a well-formed API, so it's a must then to use UI automation to be able to reach that application. There's other times where it's just the best way to do it. It's where the most well-formed data is. And then there's also occasions where an API integration is best. And we see from our data and third-party data that most enterprise automations will require both approaches. And at the end of the day, our view is we just want to give developers the options. Whatever is the best approach, we want developers to have access to it such that they can choose the best method for the scenario they're trying to implement. So that's why we've made this investment and really deepened our investment in API integration. So we have world-leading, world-class UI automation paired with best-of-breed API integration, and the two of them together really produce the better result. And it's important that this is part of an overall end-to-end platform. We are not just an integration platform. There's a lot of value there. We are a business process automation platform for automating the repetitive and routine work, but for also implementing new business process and capabilities. So our robots, our runtime, it knows how to do API integration. It knows how to do UI automation. It knows how to do other things like incorporate ML and AI skills. It knows how to do long-running workflows, so it can incorporate humans into the process. It knows how to process documents and so forth. And it also has a set of developer experiences that are low-code, visual-oriented experiences, which don't require traditional coding skills, which lowers the hurdle for people learning and become proficient to develop, delivering fast time to solution, and it gives an opportunity for you to find new capacity to unleash on problems. And it comes together as part of an end-to-end platform with management and governance, so you can feel good that this is all happening in compliance with your desired IT and security policy. And then we provide flexible deployment options. If you want to use our software and deploy and manage it in your data center, you want to deploy and manage it in your public cloud of choice, you can also consume that exact same platform in our multi-tenant SaaS service, the Automation Cloud. So you have complete flexibility in how you deploy and manage our software. So now let's talk more about the capabilities that we have in API integration. It really comes together in three parts. The first is about the developer experience, integrated into our low-code, visual-oriented experience in the UiPath Studio family. Activities are how the API integrations get lifted up into that experience in an intuitive way for developers to interact with those API integrations. The connectors do the work of connecting to the target systems and also allowing other systems to be able to integrate with the UiPath platform, so that they can initiate automations and control automations, interact with data and queues and those sort of constructs within our platform, providing that two-way integration. And lastly is a new service called the Integration Service, which provides a common set of capabilities such that across all API activities, you have a rich foundation that these are provided on. The integration service is something new. We delivered it first last year as a part of our fall release, UiPath version 21.10, and it provides a core set of capabilities. It starts with having a large library of connectors, so you can reach all the systems you need to reach. Currently, the connector library is about 40 and growing. We anticipate opening up that to the full catalog of integrations that Cloud Elements provided at over 100 plus as we move forward. We've externalized the management of connections as well, so those no longer need to be embedded into the automation. Let's say I've produced an automation and it automates based on email. I don't happen to want to share my credential as a part of that automation, so I manage that separately as a part of connection object. And so someone else using that automation can use their own connection object with that. Or if I do want to share a connection object for use in other automations, I can share that as well. So externalizing connections give a way for those to be managed independent of the automation. Triggers such that the important events that are generated out of these systems, when a record changes, when things like a lead changes in a target like Salesforce, when I receive an incoming mail, such that I can trigger an automation in a rich way. And then having that common, simplified developer experience exposed in the activity packs, such that there's a consistent way for developers to interact with all of these API integrations in any of the Studio family. And then all of that works in terms of our cross-platform support. Over the past few releases, we have introduced support for automations running not only on the Windows platform, but on the Mac and the Linux-based platform. And all of these API integrations will run in those environments as well. We're moving forward to add some new capabilities. We're very excited about this capability we're calling the Connector Builder. Connector Builder is about enabling you to be able to add new connectors as a part of the integration service that inherit from all these capabilities, such that our customers and our partners can add these sort of things and build them easily. If you've got a target that supports one of the common protocols like REST or OData or SOAP, it can be very turnkey. We've got an SDK in case there's some sort of other API standard abstracting that system, so you can lift them up and provide those integrations. The Connector Builder is available today as a part of a private preview program. If this is something that interests you, we'd encourage all of you to sign up for our Insiders program. And if not, it's also coming later in terms of a public preview, and we anticipate general availability later this summer. And if you're interested in learning more about this, please attend Hunter de Suter's presentation that follows. The marketplace is also an important part of our platform, where we allow it to be extended and you to find the things you need, whether those are integrations, activities, solutions, and templates. It's a one-stop shop to find those things from UiPath and from our partners. We've got a growing number of listings today across multiple verticals provided by our partners and by UiPath. And this will be a way, if you build something with Connector Builder that you'd like to start building a business around, we're going to make that very turnkey for this to be offered as a part of the marketplace. The marketplace capabilities, there's a link on the slides that you can click through later if you'd like to learn more about that. It has the common capabilities you'd expect in terms of curated listings, validation, things like e-commerce features. So it's an easy place for you to establish and to potentially build a business around your offerings as well. We're often asked, how do your capabilities relate to Integration Platform as a Service or IPaaS offerings? And it's true, there's a lot of overlap, certainly. And there's a lot of API to API scenarios that you would have to use an IPaaS for that you can now just implement directly in the UiPath platform. But we're also bigger than just integration. We're an end-to-end business process automation platform. And it's certainly about pairing best-of-breed UI automation with API integration. But it's also the ability to do these other things that the automation platform can do, whether that's process documents, classify and extract information from all sorts of documents as a part of your flow. That's also an extensible platform, whether that's using ML and AI skills, whether those are from you or from a third party or something we provided, or incorporating humans into the loop with things like long-running workflow. All of these things can be brought together. And it's about any type of application, from you found some existing inefficiency that you want to automate in terms of a repetitive and routine task that people are doing, or a brand new capability that's needed for the organization. Now, we also deeply integrate and have a broad set of partnerships and a broad ecosystem, and that includes IPaaS providers. And we recently, in concert and working with these leading partners, provided a set of connectors and capabilities for our platform. With Workato, we've got an activity that allows you to discover recipes, invoke recipes, Workato recipes from a UiPath application. And then Workato can reach back into the UiPath platform, control automations, interact with constructs like queues and otherwise. And the same thing for MuleSoft, such that if you've got those platforms, we can easily work with those and you can get the benefit of the UI platform in addition to using those platforms. So I started this discussion today with an assertion of the importance of this platform. And that what made it so important and different in the category of old problems and old promises we've been talking about in terms of automating business process and integrating systems, that there was something powerful and transformative about combining UI automation with deep API integration as part of an overall business process automation platform. We believe this is really going to enable you to do great things. I encourage you to attend some of the follow-up sessions, depending on your interest, hear from some of our great customers, or hear further depth from a product perspective on the integration service or the connector builder, or think about how your practice can evolve to thinking about how we can create automations that now use API integration, or deeper scenario session for developers. I encourage you to attend these sessions. I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for your partnership with us. I hope you have a great rest of your integration summit. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ted, for that great overview of UiPath's vision for API integration and how it fits into the broader automation landscape. Hi, everyone. I'm Mark Genie, the General Manager for Integrations here at UiPath. I'm going to spend a few minutes to dive deeper into the primary patterns we see in applying APIs to automation projects. And then I'll also offer some tips to consider when assessing an automation vendor's integration capabilities. Analysts agree that there's a convergence of categories between iPaaS, Integration Platform as a Service, and RPA, Robotic Process Automation. In fact, Gartner's predicted there'll be a near total convergence of iPaaS and process automation by 2024. So what does this mean as you're looking to automate a process? Processes are not category aware, meaning this simple procure-to-pay process isn't inherently iPaaS or RPA process. It's just your process with its own complexity, your own applications, and your own people who may be using email or spreadsheets or to copy data or post-it notes to track their work through manual steps. Not everything in this process is done via an application, and therefore not everything can be automated by calling an API. In fact, a recent Forrester survey estimates that more than 80% of processes require a manual routing task or a paper document or a PDF that needs to be managed. So just focusing on API to API can miss a significant portion of the tasks and effort spent in executing this process. So this is why modern platforms like UiPath are looking at the automation problem much more broadly. So yes, application to application integration is key to process automation. It is not a second-class citizen in leading automation platforms like UiPath. Moving my new vendor from my procurement system to my ERP in order to issue a PO, this is the perfect API task when working with modern apps. But what about that contract submitted back from the new vendor attached to an email as the PDF that might be manually being entered by your procurement team? You want to automate that step as well and leverage things like technologies like AI, machine learning to understand those documents, to move them into the procurement map automatically. So we call that document to application or document to API pattern. There are other patterns as well. Think about the proprietary system or an on-premises ERP that's been highly customized and doesn't have well-behaved APIs. Or the APIs are so complex in that system, it could take months to design the workflow. A UI robot can take the data from that ERP system, move it into your payment system, and you could implement this in hours or days versus months using UI to API. So that UI robot to application pattern or UI to other UIs or UI to API is an important part of automating processes as well. There's another aspect, and that is you do have people involved in these processes as well. People on your team who need assistance in automating their manual tasks and improve their productivity. Long-running processes may require a person to intervene and deal with exceptions. We call that human in the loop. In addition to the approach that traditional iPaaS take, where you build a workflow and it becomes a back-end process, we call that an unattended process or an unattended robot. But robots can also assist in real time members of your team who are maybe manually searching for that PO or that new vendor or sorting through spreadsheets manually. An RPA and an attended robot can give them the parse through that information and give them the next PO, the next vendor they need to be worked with, increasing their productivity dramatically. So true automation requires looking at every step and applying the right tool to deal with the range of patterns and activities that are part of your process. This is where the richest savings can be applied, and you can multiply exponentially the hours that can be saved. We have customers who save thousands to tens of thousands of hours by automating the entire process, not just one aspect such as API to API. So let's wrap up with a few thoughts on how to evaluate an automation platform with respect to its integration capability. The breadth of the connector catalog is clearly of high importance, but not all connectors are created equal. And so there's a few areas that to consider when you're assessing connectors in a connector catalog. First, does the connector provide the ability to easily create connections with the right authentication mechanism at the point of user engagement? Citizen developers using OAuth 2, for example, to connect to their personal productivity tool or app versus your central IT team that might be using or granting access to a corporate system using other mechanisms. Second, the depth of the connector. Can I execute all of the APIs, not just a few that are curated for me? Oftentimes, a limited surface area is made available with curated APIs, but you want the full functionality enabling you to automate more processes and not run into roadblocks because you can't access all the resources or methods at that application endpoint. And third, when considering connectors, is does the connector bring my custom data into the workflow and into my automation process via a robust discovery service? And the discovery service gives you the ability to identify the custom fields that you may have added to that Salesforce account object, or the custom object itself and all its properties and fields. You want that data to be able to participate and use that in your automation efforts as well. So let's move to event-based triggers. So let's move to event-based triggers. Events are the ability to have robots react to changes in data that may be happening in your business systems. So for example, when a new employee is created in Workday, I want to be able to trigger that onboarding robot or that onboarding workflow application. When a Salesforce when a Salesforce opportunity is changed to close one in my, and that opportunity is changed to close one, and I move that and want to move that now into NetSuite, those are events that you want to be able to trigger robots. So there's a few things to consider when you're looking at and evaluating an eventing-based service. So first is the ability to be able to filter to the specific event that I need. So let's take that Salesforce opportunity that's changed to closed one. My process where I'm creating my 360-degree report of my customer, I only want to know certain customers that are in my region of certain size. I only want to know when they close. That's what we mean by being able to narrow down those triggers to very, very specific fields or changes to data. The second is, can I attach them to a workflow and then share them with other users? So the ability to create a trigger centrally, let's say in your COE or in the IT team, attach that to a robot or a workflow, and then share that to my citizen developers. Well, my citizen developer may want to change that workflow. You may have it go to the inbox from their Gmail or Microsoft Office 365, and you can now let them change that and modify that template to go to a different inbox, for example, or a different mailbox on their system. So that's the ability to attach and share triggers. And lastly, does the platform have a scalable polling framework to be able to automate and establish triggers even if the endpoint doesn't have webhooks. Oftentimes we think about eventing with webhooks, but less than 30% of business application API endpoints support webhooks. So therefore, you need the ability to go ask when a change is being made. A webhook tells you when the data is being changed or updated, but a polling framework gives you the ability to go in and ask and be able to cover a much wider range of APIs, nearly every API in most cases, to be able to have it participate in triggering your workflows. So then let's move on to the next item, unified design tools. So I talked earlier about the variety of patterns that are involved in automating a process, API to API, UI to API, document to API, UI to UI. All those variety of patterns are critical to be able to have in one design tool, one design canvas that you can move seamlessly between them. So that's what we mean by a unified design tool. These aren't bifurcated or segmented across multiple tools. Your designers can pick whatever the best tool is, use that in a single workflow and automation, and then it'll run all in one place for your users as well. Centralized governance is crucial for enterprise scale deployments. And healthy governance is not about control, but it's about confidently and securely providing access to the right corporate data to the right users at the right time. And finally, no matter how extensive the catalog of connectors is that may be available from the vendor, there's always that new application you add or the next app that's not included in that catalog that you want, but you want to have it participate in your automation. So looking for the ability with a no code or even low code ability to publish your own connectors, to connect to your own applications and bring them and let them participate in the automation effort as well is another critical aspect. So thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it, and we appreciate your interest in learning more about how integration fits and APIs fit with automation. Immediately following, we have 4 spotlight sessions coming up that you can choose from to learn more from our customers and from our team, a deeper dive into the product. And after those sessions, we have breakouts that you can really get how-to guidance on how to use UiPath integration service in your automations. Thanks, and have a great day.
And we're going to be talking to Tavistock about their RPA integrations that they've achieved. Technology alliances at UiPath. We work with key customers and key partners in my team. And with me today is John Glynn from Tavistock. John, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, David. I'm John Glenn, Senior Manager of IT Development at Tavistock. I oversee our various business applications as well as our technical infrastructure.
Fantastic. And before we get started, I've just put up an agenda on the screen, which is these are the elements we'll cover today in the discussion with John. If you do have questions, please use the Q&A module on the screen. The slides will be available. They'll be sent to you after the summit, but you can also download them directly from the presentation. And I think there's an additional resources module there you'll see. It's quite a lot on the screen, but in there you'll see some links to some interesting content as well. So let's jump in. As you can see, here's the agenda. We're going to walk through what Tavistock is doing for automation, the benefits they're seeing, specific use cases, and then talk about the future. So let's jump right in. So, John, tell us a little bit about Tavistock, the automations you've been building. How'd you begin? How'd you get started? You know, what sort of projects are you up and away with?
Sure. So we purchased UiPath about 4 years ago when Orchestrator was still only available on premise. So we've got 2 robot servers for execution, and then we've got our server for the Orchestrator. The initial thought there was wanting to do some automations as well as use the system sort of as a middleware for integration between our various systems.
Got it. And what we see on the screen is a whole, well, not a whole bunch, there's 6 there, but these are use cases. Are these some of the examples of the automations that you've implemented at Tavistock?
Yeah, so I want to say that we've got about 60 in total. These were some of the more interesting ones, and some of the ones where beyond just automation, there are actual integrations between various systems. So the first one that you see here on the add budget data to accounting system, that is an integration that we developed between a custom application and our accounting system. So the custom application is really a project management tool for our commercial construction developers, project managers, and what they would do is build their financial forecasting models in Excel, and then manually upload those to our accounting system, sort of line by line. With this integration, we were able to just upload the Excel sheet directly to our application using UiPath's data tables to extract that data from Excel and then upload that into the accounting system. So it went from doing a lot of manual work on their end to just kind of following their same processes that they're used to working with in Excel. The only change really for them is uploading that data to our application, and then UiPath kind of takes it from there. Some of the other ones that we've worked on were integrations with SharePoint, where once a project is approved in our tool, we would have UiPath go and create that project site in SharePoint, as well as populate that project data in some of the downstream systems, like adding project codes into our accounting system, as well as some time tracking systems. And these were really just a lot of heavy admin tasks that might get kind of spread out to different departments, saying, hey, I need accounting to go do this. I need this other department to go do this. I need IT to go do this into SharePoint. Some of those are easy to forget or easy to put off until later. So with UiPath being able to do that on its own time, we're not relying on a manual process. No one's forgetting, no one's making mistakes, and people can kind of just get back to doing their job a lot faster. We've got a couple other ones where we've built integrations with our CRM systems. And really that's sort of just receiving and monitoring a robot inbox using UiPath's out-of-the-box Outlook activities. So we'll receive notifications to an Outlook inbox. The robot kind of knows what to look for based on the subject and the content of the emails. It will extract that data and load it into Salesforce as we specify. We've got a couple other ones where we're moving contracts and other documents into SharePoint. And then the last one where we're moving leasing data from our accounting system into Salesforce. That was a bit more complicated. Also an interesting one, which I think we're covering in more detail in a couple of the other slides.
Okay, great. Quick question: do you give your robots cool names?
No, we don't. We kind of just call them the robots. Okay. So.
That's a feature. That's a feature that we see in our COE internally at UiPath. They got some really funky names, which is actually fun to display. Sometimes they're a little too light on the humor though. Great. Let's move on. So tell me about some of the benefits. Obviously, when you've got people doing a task and then the robot comes in and does it for them, they get it really fast. I imagine there's no loss of knowledge about what the robot's doing from the people who previously used to do it. That generally drives some pretty fast adoption and awareness of the value. Just tell us about some of the values that you see, some of the areas where the automation has delivered benefits.
Yeah, so some of the notes you've got here, like reduced IT tickets, again, using some of the examples from that previous slide, not having to have people manually update some of the downstream systems once an event occurs in one system. People are not making mistakes, or they're not forgetting to do something and then coming to IT and asking for our help with asking why data is not here, or maybe they mistyped something, and that's kind of what brought about that confusion. So definitely a reduction in IT tickets in that area. Some of the side benefits of that are, again, the data accuracy, not having manual inputs, not now it's no longer really prone to human error. The speed and data availability, and then also the data availability across multiple systems. Some of the processes that we developed, if we had to do it manually, we probably just wouldn't do it. We would rely on having somebody have two accounts, and they would have to go into two systems to find what they were looking for. But some of the scenarios, there's of course the upfront development work and process gathering and understanding and all that. But once we have it working smoothly, we no longer have to really do much, and it simplifies everyone's life. So.
Yeah, it's a good point, I think, about sometimes there's tasks that you just don't do them because they're so trivial. And I think that's the key. If automation really, for it to be effective, needs to be that, like I call it the infinite long tail of things you could do, right? You go into those tasks that you'd love to automate, but you wouldn't do manually anyway, and that actually drives new benefits that you weren't even realizing before. So tell me about the learning curve. Was it difficult or challenging for people at Tavistock to buy into this? Did they see it and get excited, or were they initially skeptical?
I mean, I think I may have been one of the biggest skeptics initially. To be honest, this wasn't really my idea for a project, although I'm very happy we did it. Just with it being a newer technology at the time, at least for me and for the team anyway, I thought, I was concerned with, I think, what a lot of the other business users were concerned with, which is the data accuracy, which is how are we going to know if there's an error? How are we going to troubleshoot these things? How do we know if, like I said, if everything's coming across the way that we intend it to, and then we become reliant, and if something doesn't work, now we've become reliant on a technology that's not meeting our needs. But that was not the case at all. It was just a lot of sort of worrying for no reason. I think we started off, though, with some of the smaller, less mission critical automations, like moving invoices that we received via email into in our AP system, or downloading utility invoices for across our commercial buildings. So actually logging into the utility provider's website, downloading the invoice each month, and then moving that to AP, which previously an AP clerk did that manually for tons of buildings. It was just very boring and time consuming. Again, those processes are not super mission critical, so it was easy to convince the team to sort of experiment with that. Once they saw that it's working fine, we sort of gained trust, and we moved on to some of the more difficult ones. I think that helped us too, as in the IT team, rely on this for integrating data between systems, and sort of relying on this as a middleware, because some of them were using the API, and that's great. But some of them are actually just going in and doing screen reading. So that was sort of more of my skepticism there. But glad that has not been the case. I think too, as we've sort of developed more of these, we've been putting people into that mindset of automation and having the robot do things and having the robot help us. And what I think is really interesting there is that they're almost thinking of this robot as sort of this thing with human capabilities. So they're not having to turn on a technical mindset to start asking these questions and start generating these ideas. And we've sort of seen collaboration with non-technical users in a way that we're not used to seeing. So I think that's a benefit in itself. And then as far as the rest of the learning curve, I think, with any system, initially you're going to have a learning curve if you don't have previous expertise, which none of us did. But we relied on the UiPath Academy, which is a great resource that goes from beginner to advanced, has a lot of best practices. You can learn things like the RE framework, which helps you develop better automations with error checking and just kind of more consistency in your development. So it's overall been a very good experience.
Great. I think the lesson there is, find the non-threatening tasks to automate, and you'll probably find a future champion right there, because you're taking it away from them, stuff that they don't care and they probably don't want to do, because like you said, it's mundane, it's boring, and it's probably error prone for those reasons. Fantastic. Let's jump into a little more detail. Why don't we look at a couple of the automation processes? Tell us what we're seeing on the screen. What is this process? And tell me more about the benefits that you got from this.
So this is an example of an integration we built, which retrieves our commercial lease data from our accounting system and populates that into Salesforce. And if you kind of think of the way a database is structured in a relational format, we've got that on either end where this data is stored multiple layers deep into different tables that it's related to. This would have been a little difficult to do manually. And again, one of the, I think I used the example earlier, this would have been one of those processes where we just had somebody, would have had somebody checking both systems versus trying to do an integration just because of the level of complication here. UiPath allowed us to kind of handle all the logic and update tables where needed if some dependency was missing. So what this robot does is it monitors or it checks periodically our accounting system for any updates to commercial buildings and that are entered there. That's our source of truth. It will then query Salesforce or check Salesforce for those commercial buildings. If there's a discrepancy or that building doesn't exist in Salesforce, it will create the records and all the dependencies for creating a building in Salesforce. Then it will sort of go down everything related to that building. It will search for suites, make sure the suites are synced up to Salesforce. If it's not there, it will create it. It will look into the leases and compare the leases from accounting to Salesforce, create it if it's not there, add any occupant data, which in our case is an account in Salesforce if that doesn't exist. And then it will go in to each lease and update the payments for each lease. And it will also update the delinquencies for each lease, if any. And again, this data is across multiple tables in accounting and then multiple objects in Salesforce. So it's been really cool that we can get as specific as we need with pulling data from one system and then formatting it and putting it into Salesforce as we saw fit. I think that this perhaps could have been a more difficult integration using other sort of traditional methodologies. And with UiPath, it was just sort of like developing any other one. It wasn't super time consuming or very difficult at all. So.
Did this map directly to what people were doing, or was there a little optimization once you kind of started automating that?
Previously, this wasn't being stored in Salesforce, so they would have to reference two systems.
Oh, okay. So you created the process as well as, it was an optimization as well as an automation at the same step.
Correct. Yeah. So this brought in extra data availability to another system, has our sales team avoiding having to log into the accounting system to check something. And yep.
Yeah, we see a fair bit of that too, which is, you know, in the space of looking at the automation, at the human workflow, the manual workflow, it can be automated like in situ, in its current state. Or you could look at it further and say, well, would we change this anyway? Or having looked at it and pulled it apart and step by step that, you know, walk through it, we see a few areas where we could optimize it. In this case, it looks like you brought Salesforce directly into the process, as opposed to it being a two-step process. Now it's just one step that the robot can do. And so not just automating, but collapsing or consolidating the complexity of the workflow as well.
Correct, yeah. And like I said, if we had to have somebody go in and try to do this manually, it would be very error-prone just because of the number of tables they need to look through, the number of screens they need to click through, all the data that they need to verify, and then finally inputting that data. As you can imagine, lease payments are received monthly, so you're talking multiple records per tenant.
Yeah, and the problem with complexity is and repetition of that process is it really creates fertile ground for human error to come to the top. So good to avoid that. Yep. Let's look at another one. So what's this one? This is LoopNet to Salesforce. Tell us a little bit about this one.
So LoopNet is a platform where we publish the available commercial leases. So that's a public platform that anybody can go and search for commercial leases. What happens here is when we get a hit on a lease or interest in a lease, we get, or a lead, we get an email that is received to our robot inbox, again, using the out-of-the-box UiPath Outlook tools. We are monitoring that inbox for any emails from LoopNet, and then we can extract that data and put that into Salesforce. And this is an example of, I mean, we've used this sort of framework for others as well, where I'm sure, you can develop a more robust connection, perhaps via an API, but this was sort of a quick win where it's very common functionality to receive email notifications on an event in a system. So we send those to the inbox and can kind of process those based on the content and the subject of the email and do as we wish with that data.
Very cool. Yeah, and you mentioned that you're using standard capabilities, activities that just sit on email box, and so that made it, was having that activity ready, because these are features of the integration of UiPath integrations that make those interconnections with systems really easy. So that was a drag and drop for you. Then very easy to stand up a robot that would then just monitor an inbox. Correct.
Yeah, and thinking about it in that way, this again, quick win, easy development. It requires one skill set from one UiPath developer versus requiring someone with maybe more advanced programming knowledge or having to go and become familiar with each different system's API. And we've used this method across multiple systems.
Excellent. Yeah, good stuff. Thanks for that. Okay, so that's a great walkthrough. I know you've done 16. We talked about 6 of them and then jumped into a couple in some detail. Where are things moving with automation at Tavistar?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking to do more. Like I said, our end users are kind of generating their own ideas and they're excited about it. A lot of this initially was driven by IT and kind of looking for the low-hanging fruit, which are processes that are sort of mundane and repetitive and sort of easy to automate. So those are the ones that were kind of obvious to us. But I think it's important to gather more input from the users, and since they're the subject matter experts, they know what they do on a day-to-day basis. We kind of just have visibility from working with them day to day, but we don't necessarily have intimate knowledge of all of their processes. So we're in the midst of moving to Automation Hub, which is the SaaS version of Orchestrator, and there's a ton of other features in there which I'm excited to learn about. But one of the features that's cool in Automation Hub is the process mining and the ability to solicit feedback from your end users, where they can go and do a screen recording. They can kind of develop, sort of visualize their business processes, and that will help us kind of get better ideas on where to focus on next. We do use document understanding, and as I understand, there's even more capability in AI Center with machine learning. So I'm looking forward to learning more about that and seeing where else we can use that. And then finally, just continuing to educate and excite our teams about automation and integrations with our various systems.
Great. And I think it's true to say, but I'd love your opinion on this, that once it's like the red pill, blue pill kind of dilemma in the matrix, right? Is once you get automation, once you understand it, and then you start seeing things, knowing that what makes a good candidate for automation, you start seeing automation everywhere. Would that be accurate to say that was your experience?
Yeah, like I said, we kind of started out a little skeptical, and then it took some convincing to move with some of the non-mission critical business processes. And then from those same teams, we started seeing sort of a demand of, hey, I need this, I need this. I want the robot to move documents from some external user's Dropbox account into our SharePoint. and kind of code it and label it with all the metadata that's required. So we're seeing more ideas come from the business, not necessarily being initiated by a discussion from IT, which is always nice, because people sometimes tend to see IT as a cost center or just this necessity to keep things going. And I think they're starting to see us more as a strategic business partner that can help them improve their operations and help the business in general.
Agree, yeah. And I think with Automation Hub and the ability for users of any level of skill is like once they see something that could be automated, then they can log that, they can register that, and then they can put their thoughts about why, and no one knows that better than them because they're doing it. And often we see, simple 1-2 system tasks done this way, but emerging, once that begins, firstly, the collection is great because users have an input into the pipeline of what gets built for automation. And the simpler ones, often citizen developers come in and say, hey, I want to crack at this, and they get to build it. But then you've got the center of excellence who builds the kind of the mission critical, the really robust ones. But I think the point is it just starts that cycle of awareness and then investment where the users actually see something they created, their ideas, get flowed into actual deliverables. And then at the back end, the return on investment is great because it's saving them all that time and effort. And then, of course, it saves it for me. It saves it for everyone else who has to do the same thing I do. So it's a shareable value there once that idea is captured and then encoded into an automation.
Absolutely. And I think just to add on to that a little bit, is that some people might feel a little, especially less technical users might feel intimidated, making any type of suggestion for IT improvements. And when you sort of take a robot and humanize it and you tell them, look, imagine this physical machine sitting at your desk, clicking a mouse, doing things on your computer, what can you tell him or what can you tell the robot to do? We can likely automate that. So I think that removes a lot of those barriers. And like I said, some of that initial intimidation of, hey, this is not my area. Well, it is because the processes better than anyone. And it's easy enough for them to kind of translate what they're wanting. And then we kind of figure out the how-to.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when we talk about a non-technical person submitting an idea, I mean, have you got an explicit example, like a role and what sort of ideas that they came out of? Because often they're going to be a little skeptical, or maybe not skeptical, but maybe a bit nervous submitting something because they don't know necessarily if it's a good idea or not. No one really likes to give bad ideas. Not that, it's just a human thing that we want to produce quality. But obviously, in submitting that, one, I'd love to hear an example of it, and two, how quickly could you reassure them that was a great idea, and then give us more, because I think that starts the flow of knowledge as well from the user base, which is where all the best ideas come for automations.
Right. Yeah, an example that comes to mind is I think I used it earlier, but moving some of the documents from external sites or just coding project documents in SharePoint. So we have hundreds of job codes in each project, which has a job code. We've got a project center site in SharePoint, and then there's tons of metadata that goes into whenever you submit a document. And so some of our users have asked, well, this is a very cumbersome and manual process, and it's annoying every time I upload documents, I have to attach all this metadata. So we've been able, when provided with the right inputs, we've been able to sort of extract some of those documents, or if we know the document source, extract those documents and move those into SharePoint and have the robot do all the coding. And so a lot of times if they're working with architects or any external contractors, that team will usually share a box or a Dropbox or a OneDrive or some sort of document repository, whatever system that they're using. When they can give us access to that folder, we can sort of tell the robot what project this is for and what the metadata is that needs to be loaded into SharePoint, and that's something that didn't really initiate from the IT department, but came from construction, and we've been able to do that with quite a bit of projects. So.
Cool, yeah, and as you said before, IT now becomes an advisor and an enabler for their ideas to be put into play, which comes back and saves them time and effort. Great, this is fantastic, John. We'll wrap it up. I just finally, before we go, any advice for organizations who are starting out with automation? You've been on the journey, you've been there a while, you've got 60 plus automations out there and plenty more to come, as it seems. How would you encourage organizations to start thinking about automation if they're just starting that journey?
I'd say, kind of look at your processes, figure out which ones are redundant, which are repetitive, which are the least enjoyable, and then start from there. And then also try not to think of, even if you are a technical person, try not to think of these automations from a technical standpoint, but think of it, how does a human do this now? How can I get this done with RPA? And then maybe just do it the quickest way possible, and then focus on maybe optimizing. I think in IT, we tend to want to just do things the best way the first time around. But sometimes, you just got to get started somewhere, and you can work on sort of optimizing those processes later. So start with the easier, low-hanging fruits, the less mission critical. Get buy-in from your business users, maybe the ones that are more skeptical. Try to get them on board, and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think the thing is, once you start, then those benefits will just start rolling in. You'll be saved minutes, and then hours, and then weeks, and months even of time. And that's one thing we see as companies scale. They measure their gains, their productivity gains, in terms of hundreds and thousands of hours. In a lot of the cases we have in our own internal COE, tens of thousands of hours of time saved. So thanks, John. That was great. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We're going to wrap it up now. Don't forget, after this, we have 2 workshop sessions available, specifically focused on API automation, a deep dive on managing connected automations. And so they'll be starting up very shortly. So I look forward to you joining that. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.
At the end of the year. The key component that comes out of that survey is really about our topic here. I'm using connections in my automations because I want to we manage connectors, right? The integration services is manage that access to that. How do we do, once a connection is then created, or any of the triggers, how do we really bring that together and do permission management, making sure nothing is going wrong with that? And also, one of the key components here that we have talked with many of you about is we want to share a connection. It's great that I have credentials, but I don't want to slack my credentials to somebody else, because that's not secure. I don't want to send my credentials over email so that one of the devs who's building an automation can now start using my connection. I want to know what happens with it. And once I share it, I want to make sure that that connection is being used like I was hoping it would be used for, or what it would be used for. And some of that obviously sits within integration service, and you'll learn today that some of that will live in Orchestrator. But then there's also third-party applications, right? There's applications, when you do this in an SAP or a NetSuite as an example, you'll be able to set permissions on an account that you create within that application. Additional requests, and they kind of mingle with the above ones are really, what do I do when I actually want to connect to an application that is not available to me within integration service? What is the governance and sharing options that I have? And then finally, and I'll actually move that to the last part of the slide deck, is more about event triggers. What can I do to customize my events? Because there's some specific things in there that we have launched, right? We've initially launched it in preview, triggers by itself, and then we move forward, and we now actually just released event data filters. And I'll talk a little bit more about that because that helps with the customization and making sure that there is less clutter on how we as integration service are interacting with Orchestrator today. The one thing that I'll add in addition to this slide is that first note on the additional integration service requests is the connector. What do I do when a connector is not available? So we have our integration service. We, as a team, publish connectors on a regular basis, and we make sure that they are up to high standards. Now, obviously, when you're building an automation that is to another connector, one that you use locally within your enterprise, that we haven't seen as one that we need to expose, we do have a new option. And this is super exciting. It will be going GA by October this year, and it's called Connector Builder. My coworker, Gunther, actually had a session on this as well. So in case you missed the option of Connector Builder, make sure to tune into that because it's going to be super exciting. And we're bringing you a no-code connector builder experience where you yourself can, in a matter of minutes, depending on how complex the third-party application is, you can bring something on board of our platform with an integration service that you can then start leveraging throughout the rest of the UiPath product suite. So all of a sudden you can start using it in Studio and continue your automation. And that brings us back to connected automations. Now, managing connected automations is the big question here is, with that previous survey, who are we solving this for, right? There's different types of groups, different types of examples that where sharing becomes such a key aspect of their development process. And a good example is we've been speaking to pre-sales teams who set up a series of demos that they reuse for the connection or the conversation that they're having with their customers, as an example, or potential customers, which works great. They're like, yeah, we published all our automations into a certain folder. Then from there, the problem with it is they can just take it. Anybody in that pre-sales team can just take that demo, start reusing it until it is a connected automation. Because in today's scenario, each individual within that team would have to make sure that they have an account or recreated that account that it was built for into their own integration service user, basically, right? Everybody owns that connection. And that is something where sharing is a perfect example why that would be helpful. Because if sharing is an option, just one person can move this and share it with the 10 other team members, and now the demo will just run out of the box. Another good example is on another completely different level. You're an administrator and a process was published, right? And as an administrator, I just want to make sure that whatever that process does, it uses a specific account, because that specific account to, let's say, Salesforce, has access to the entire organization's data with lead information or account information from Salesforce. Or the same thing with an SAP. I want to make sure that this process uses this given account because that's what we defined within SAP, and it's not a developer account. We want to make sure that the moment we run this in production, the account has access, or the connection has access to all of the data that is available within SAP as we have defined it within that third party. And that's how I started the conversation as well in the beginning, is there is a level that we control within integration service, and then there is this level of permission sets that can live in that third-party application. And administrators know this for sure, right? You can go and define on an account level in an SAP what you can do, what data you can access, and what your permission set is. Then a third example I would like to call out is when you're a finance administrator and your day-to-day tasks are in NetSuite, you would like somebody to automate processes for you. You define, very similar as in that COE example, you would define and set up an account within NetSuite. And that account has access to recent invoices, etc. Now, within NetSuite, you then define that that account doesn't have access to HR capabilities, as an example. I don't want to give these credentials to just anybody. It would be perfect if I, as the finance administrator, have a super simple user experience to set up a connection to NetSuite with that account that I just created in NetSuite. And that will simplify things, right? Because now I don't have to share credentials with any of the developers for whatever they were trying to build. I created one connection and everybody can reuse this. And that brings us to integration service and as I called it before, the marriage of with Orchestrator. So in integration service, today, all the connections you create to any of those connectors that we have are your own. And that's the same for triggers. You built them, they are yours. So there is no sharing capabilities. Nobody else can reuse them. Apart from the connectors, obviously, because connectors are kind of out of scope in our conversation of today. We know that this is a request for many of you guys, but connectors live on the tenant level. We do have plans to make management changes about that, but that goes hand in hand with that connector builder session that I was speaking about, and make sure that we have a future story for that as well. Now then on the right side of the screenshot where Orchestrator sits is Orchestrator has this component, right? It has a variety of entities like credential store, like assets, queues, etc. Triggers, they also, within Orchestrator, we also have triggers. All of that sits within a folder. And that is the way within Orchestrator to manage your entities, right? Which can be an asset as an example. And that's how you provide access to others, making sure that that management layer within Orchestrator is where you can do these things. And that brings us to the actual folder situation, right? So the governance and the user management within Orchestrator lives on a folder perspective. Very different, so we don't have folders in today's scenario within integration service. But if you would want to share something within Orchestrator, you do that on that folder level. Then you move your assets in there as an example of one of the entities, and you could define what the permission set is for that. We are bringing additional permissions to Orchestrator. We're bringing connections where you can define for a user or a group if they're allowed to view, edit, delete, or create connections, which is perfect, right? Because by bringing folders into integration service and you have a view only, that means you can see all the connections in that folder, but you can as well execute, because that's where your robot will actually live in as well. Now we have that execution permission. In addition, we could state that you can create a connection in a certain folder, but you're not allowed to delete this. So you can go really fine-grained in this, just like you were used to with anything else you're doing in Orchestrator. So we want to reuse that functionality. Triggers is already available in Orchestrator. However, we are going to, since integration service also has triggers, we are going to reuse that exact same privilege that you have in the permission set within Orchestrator. And then our entire UI is going to be adapted, making sure that we leverage these permissions within IS, within integration service. So, and this is then really the key component here, right? So this is currently under development to be released by end of July, beginning of August. And we are bringing folders, and this is super exciting. We are bringing folders in the exact same way as you know it within Orchestrator. We're bringing them to integration service. And from there, it will come with the same permission handling, right? You don't do the permission management within integration service because we want to stick to our core. We have connectors, connections, and triggers. And with that, we're going to add connector builders so you can extend on those connectors. But those are the three core components of integration service. However, what we really want you to do is create and use those connections into your automations and build those connected automations. But the management aspect, that is exactly what Orchestrator is for. So, so that comes down to permission management, making sure that the folders, you create them within Orchestrator. We will be using those to display on the screen. And so all the folders you have in Orchestrator are automatically visible here. Then your next step is you select a connector, you select Jira, and you want to add a connection. You'll go to integration service, you'll say add connection, and we will move that into the folder that you selected. Now, when that folder is shared, so in the example of the pre-sales team that I gave earlier, when that folder is shared with that entire pre-sales team, which is, you can define that user's access very specifically in Orchestrator. Let's just say, 10 people, and you're the one creating the connections. You can define there that everybody else can reuse them, but not necessarily delete them. And that's a really core component here. And this is how we're going to move this forward. Now, it doesn't stop here, because the important part is that just creating those connections in a shared folder doesn't necessarily solve the entire problem of sharing a connection, right? The key component is obviously that you can use it. So we're adapting Studio, and we're making sure that all the activity packs will now be displaying that folder information into Studio within the activity pack of the connector. So in this example, I am using my Salesforce connections, and I created them over a variety of folders. I specifically took this as an example because my guide at vanwert@uipath.com has the exact same name. Remember that you could change names in integration service, but it's really key here from an example perspective is if we would leave off the folder naming, you wouldn't know what connection to select because which one is which, right? So the one in the sales folder, as an example, might have potentially more access or more sales specific access than the one in my personal work folder, because that might be a demo account to a Salesforce sandbox, as an example. And so that's really key for us. And what I need to mention as well is that the capability of today in integration service, when I go back to this previous slide, is as much as I talk about sharing connections, whereas today a connection lives on you as an individual, you can still do that, right? Orchestrator has the option, or has the one folder that is called your personal work folder. If you don't want data to be shared, any of your assets within Orchestrator or any of your connections that you'll be creating through integration service, that is exactly the folder where you will move them into your personal work folder. And they will show up here as well, and we will clearly identify this is that connection in that personal work folder. This is specifically important for connections to 365, as an example. You probably don't want to create your email account in a process that you're building and expose that into a shared folder where now hundreds of people have access to. They can start reading your email potentially. So that's where you're going to have to be careful. But we are making sure that we display this and push this further through into Studio. We don't stop there. As a COE admin, when that process or that automation is being pushed and published into Orchestrator, we are giving you the option to overwrite this. And that is just to make sure to stick with that example that I gave in the beginning of the slide deck. The COE admin wants to override and making sure that this specific robot is executing with in this example on the screenshot, the finance connection, because that finance connection has so much more detail than any other connection. You can do this in Orchestrator. You can go on your process, click edit, and then we will show you a listing of the connections that are available for you. And again, we are making sure that folders are being introduced here as well on this connection level, which is important because this is information that flows from within integration service straight back into orchestrator, even though they obviously already have the notion about folders. Then the last part of that is we're moving this into Assistant, and you can create, so it's folders in Assistant, right? When you are the end user and you're executing your robot, you can use that Salesforce connection and then state, and there as well have the goal and the notion of what are the folders that this connection lives in. It will clarify a lot, right? Because you don't necessarily have that access, or you don't have the notion to go into integration service, make sure what happens there, because you're just using all your robots through Assistant. So we're making sure that we're pushing that information straight into Assistant as well. When I bring that all together, the full life cycle of this is that you're an RPA developer, you live in Studio. You're an administrator, you do this changes in Orchestrator. At runtime, you do this in Assistant. And all of that information is being displayed there. What is key here as well is that when you add your new connections, we are moving them into your personal work folder. So through Assistant, you'll have the option to manage your connections or to add a connection in that dropdown. You don't want to share this necessarily out of Assistant because it might be a 365 connection. We don't know on that Assistant level what that connection is really going to be used for. So we want to be careful, and you move it through these applications directly in your personal work folder. If you do want to make it shared, you can go back and manage your connections and move that into a folder within integration service. We don't stop there. This is a very similar slide as I said before, but it was on connections. We are also going to be doing this for triggers. And that brings me to the last set of my slide deck here, is for triggers, we are moving this into folders as well. So where a connection lives in a folder, you can create a shared trigger in a folder. And that trigger can now start using, what is also important here is as it uses processes from in whatever folder, you can also use a connection. So you can build a trigger in your personal work folder and use a connection from the sales folder as an example. Or you can share that trigger with your coworkers. And that same management perspective with the permissions, etc., who can delete a trigger, who can manage, who can create it, that lives in Orchestrator as well on that folder level, because that's the permission sharing. The last part I want to talk about is the customization, which has been a key request of our users. Is if you remember the first graph, is the customization of triggers. So there is already a collaboration between integration service and orchestrator today, right? But it's rather slim. It's when your trigger gets triggered and we actually find an event that matches your trigger today, we talk to orchestrator and we will schedule your robot execution. That's a one-on-one conversation. We find 20 events coming back from the vendor that match your trigger. Those will be 20 executions in Orchestrator. And that's the only communication there is today. This is very broad because when you would, on this slide as an example, this is a connector that we use for 365. You select your connection. And then in today's world, you could state the calendar event is modified. Now, any calendar event that is being triggered or being modified is being moved directly into Orchestrator. So if we find 100 results, we move 100 robot executions into Orchestrator, and it is up to the RPA dev to go into Studio and state, fetch the information about that event, and then verify if that information is something you want to handle in your process. If not, skip. So that's a lot of work. We have introduced event data filters, and that's the marked area here on this slide, which really gives you extra conditions on any of our connectors that we have, extra conditions that you can now bring in to fine-tune all the filtering within your trigger. You can state in this example, not just when a calendar event is modified, but also when the subject it contains demo or when it falls in between these time slots. Only then handle my process that I'm building. And that's super key because we're doing the server-side filtering. We fetch from 365, still the same thing, is a calendar event modified, and then we'll start going fine-tuning on the 100 results we get back. Do any of these, does this condition match? Only then we will trigger your robot. So instead of 100 executions, you might now only see 10 scheduling items in Orchestrator, which then also results in cleaner code in your process because you don't have to deal with that anymore in the process. It lives on the trigger itself from a configuration perspective. And that's super key, right? Because that is less robot executions. Your logs in Orchestrator are going to be a lot less cluttered. And again, it's so much cleaner code. And you can define multiple of these triggers. We will run a batch to, in this example, to 365, give us all the events that happened, and then we'll go over the listing of triggers that you have identified, and we'll run over them one by one, and then we'll, based upon that, we'll fire the right process and kick it off into Orchestrator as you have defined on the top right of the screen. What's the process to execute? That meets all of these conditions that I have fine-tuned in my event data filters. And again, this is available to all the connectors. I'm displaying this for 365, but you can start thinking about the examples of Jira as an example where you can do this. The other notion that is important for managing your triggers is that by default, we're doing this polling to the vendor side, right, to Salesforce, to 365 every 5 minutes. But you can change this. You can't change this on the trigger level itself, but you change this on the connection. So a connection has one or multiple triggers. You change it. So we, as I just explained, we fetch all that information at that time interval from the third-party application. Then we start applying all your filters across any filter that is available on the connection, right? So if you change it on the connection, you got to know that this polling interval, if you set it to every 30 minutes instead of 5 minutes, every 30 minutes, we will now make sure that we run over all the, so that first, again, that we do the call to the third party, and then that we will execute your individual triggers, but then all together, right, on that 30-minute time frame. And that was it. Those were the slides and the talk track that I had for you. And so to summarize really is, this is work in progress at this stage. That's also why it's not a live demo at this point in time. But we are releasing this and bringing these features of sharing and the collaboration between Orchestrator and integration service. We're bringing that together by end of July, beginning of August is when we're looking to release this. We will announce this. This is a super big feature that everybody has asked for. So we'll for sure watch our forums because that's where we'll be announcing this. We'll have release notes as well. And more importantly, we're also making sure that this is available throughout the rest of the product suite within UiPath. So you'll see this in the activity packs so that you can use your shared connections, etc. The data filters and the polling that I spoke about the customization of your triggers, that is actually available today. That is already there. So if you don't know where to find the polling interval, we obviously have the help files for it. But again, you go into your connection list within integration service, because the other products don't have an option to change this today, but that's where you can change it on the connection level. And data filters is something that we have just released, which is exciting and should be exciting for you as an RPA dev. Thank you for joining the session. And I hope these changes are exciting for you.